Alec, are you surprised that the war in Ukraine is lasting already for all? This is something that we could have predicted since the war started, that it's going to take a while until we'll be able to see a resolution.
I'm not surprised, really. I was surprising when they start the war, but I start to learn about the two leaders, Putin and Zelensky. I spoke it was 3 or 4 months ago, I spoke with some member of the Ukrainian parliament, and they say to me, we are for the president. The problem with this war that you have two leaders and with a very, very high ego. And I think both of them, they are not ready to speak really. Really, they can speak for the media. Peace negotiation, they don't want to speak. I'm so sorry about the Ukrainian people because I'm really for the Ukrainian. I hate Putin and I know he's a criminal, but when you are fighting, if you are very intelligent, you must say sometime, no, I'm stopping and I'm starting negotiation. And I don't see any side now. So I'm not surprised.
Just for the people who are watching this, I want to give them a little bit more of a text. I have talked to many Ukrainian colleagues and experts. They have their perspective, how the conflict happened. They have their point of view and, how they see things. I'm curious from your perspective, how do you think Ukraine and Russia, Ukrainian and Russians, people, nations that used to live in one geographical border, I'm referring to the Soviet Union, they have similar cultures, they have a lot of family members living in both countries. I don't want to dive deep into the history. For example, like I've seen the interview with Tucker Carlson and Putin when they went all the way to the 10th century, described. I want to go there because, in my opinion, this is a very gray part to, interpret what happened there to make any conclusion out of that story. But in your perspective, specifically if we're looking at the time frame 1991 to the full-scale invasion of Russians into Ukraine or Putin into Ukraine, what has happened since 1991, the fall of the Soviet Union, the declaration of independence on the Ukrainian side of the state of Ukraine, to the point where these people are at full-scale war? From the European perspective, from your personal perspective, what have led to the highest activity of a conflict? Because conflict can be political, it can start from different stages and lead all the way up to a full-scale war. And I think we're at that last stage of a conflict. What has happened from your perspective?
With you that to go back to the past is very dangerous, because if you go back before 91, so people will go back before 18th century, and it's you can see in all conflict, for example, in the Middle East, if you take the Quran and the Bible, everywhere, and you can say about the history what you want. I think the problem between Russia and Ukraine, two states, and they're cousin, they're the same family, and the government. There's a very, very important difference. And for my side, when I do negotiation, I prefer to speak with the civil society. Sometimes I have another voice that you will never hear from the government. So let's start. I think that one of the big problems was the Donbass. is for me, Donbass must be people in the Western world. I, it was like a civil war with 6,000 people, and people forgot that uh, the impact of the civil war was very, and it was like for me like an excuse for Putin all the time to find some excuse. And so I wanted to go to take the defense of the people of Donbass. So we spoke about uh, the past. So this to, Putin saying he wants the great Russia, like the Tsar. So for him, I think he did a mistake. He was thinking that it would be very easy to come to Ukraine, and the army was not ready. He was thinking very bad thing because the secret service of Russia was not so good that as what we think at this time, and the army was not prepared for the war. So now there is a war, and now we have to speak about, for me, about the future.
Can
What,
question
how,
here,
how, yeah,
specifically about
oh,
Donbass? The Donbass situation started in 2014. I think the hybrid war started in the Donbass region. That was, I think, the best period to solve that conflict, to get a resolution, and to avoid at all costs a full-scale war.
yeah.
From your experience, from your perspective, what the Ukrainians, what the European Union, and just in general, the West, to resolve the Donbass situation, the Donbass conflict?
To discuss, to discuss between the two societies, the two civil society, the and the Donbass one, not political discussion, to put the two civil society to hear really what they want, what the people of Ukraine want, and what the people from Donbass. I don't know. I don't know another situation inside the mentality of the people, but perhaps a votation or yes, a referendum but discussion. I think the country forgot to speak with the people. That was the big mistake, and we can see a new mistake now for the future. And I'm very afraid about the Ukraine after the war because you don't prepare the after war. The people who work a little bit with Russian, what we would do with the children, and all those questions. So you have, sorry, perhaps through NGOs, through other government. I don't like when government are part of negotiation because they want to do something for their own country, not for Ukraine, for example. So perhaps through to find some solution, and sometimes the people is more intelligent than the government.
That in the government. Um, how when you're saying that the civil societies should communicate between themselves, I see that perspective. Um, because the war is mostly controlled. When I'm saying control, I'm talking about financial assistance, military assistance. The parties that are playing a part in that conflict, for example, the Western Europe, how do they view the war right now after almost 3 years of fighting? What is their perspective? Are they exhausted? Do they want to finish it? Do they want to resolve it? Or they're willing to continue helping Ukraine at all costs?
Okay, so for the European population, what we can hear in Europe that they are fed up with this war. because you can see many economic forums in Western Europe. So to send money to Ukraine was good, but is enough because they don't see any solutions in the future. So they don't know why they have to even to send some guns and some planes, so many things like that. That is what the people are thinking. And it can be a problem because the politician is following the people. Now we know that perhaps with Trump, it will stop to help and to send some guns to Ukraine. So today, in a meeting I don't know where it was in Germany, the head of the European Union said, we will send something to Ukraine. We'll send guns and money and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that the people will agree with that. I'm agree for that because already you need in Ukraine guns and even for us, if they attack, if Putin attacks Ukraine, he can attack another European country. And this guy is very dangerous. But in the second hand, uh, the Ukrainian power must show to the European people that they want to stop the war. They are ready for discussion, and we cannot see that now.
I want to dive deeper into the perspective that Trump, the president-elect in the United States, is going to come to the office in a week and a half. Actually, today is the 9th of January. So, from America, we hear a lot statements such as, we don't know why that war lasted for so long. This is a useless war. We want to quit that conflict. So it looks like the Americans, the population, and Trump himself, they see the war and the conflict in Ukraine as a very simple solution. If I cannot negotiate peace, I'll just quit. And it looks like the Americans, the United States citizens, are quite in support of that. However, I think, and you've mentioned that by yourself, that from your personal opinion, we need to continue, like the European Union, the European countries need to continue support Ukraine with guns and financially. So it looks like the Europeans have a better understanding that this is not just about the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, not just about Russian taking Ukrainian land, but maybe it's also Russians are trying to provoke a change in security situation in Europe. Do Europeans understand that? And if they do, are they ready to continue support Ukrainian people if Americans will quit or minimize their support?
I think they would do that. Yes, they would continue to support because they understood that the war is not against Ukraine, but it's against Europe and Western Europe. Yes. So I think the European citizen understood that. The European governments understood that. And we have the help of the Eastern Europe, the country from Eastern Europe, and like Hungary or Poland and all those countries that know very good the Russian. And they say all the time, be careful of them. So we have to support you. We have to, that is the same war. It will start, for me, it starts with Ukraine, but it will continue with other countries if we don't stop him.
How strong is the idea right now in Europe to push Ukraine to quit on the occupied territories by Russia, to give up on them, to achieve any peaceful negotiations?
You have two sort of ideas. One of the people, and it depends on the political party. That is so funny. I think On the left side, many people say we have to help, we have to continue to help. On the right side and the far right, so they are very close to Putin. They want to stop because they are against Europe. You have to think that for most of the people in Europe, they feel more European than French or German. So, and this war was against a part of Europe. And if you ask people in the street, I'm sure if you do poll, I would be sure that more than 50% would be agree that Ukraine is a part of Europe.
In that context, where do you think we're standing now in terms of the peace negotiations? Because we have right now new calls for peace, and we have the back channel being active again. Where do we stand right now in terms of the peace negotiations, and how successful is the back channel? Do we have any, breaking points where we can already hinge on and say we're getting closer to any potential resolution that we can promote or offer to the sides?
So if Ukraine really wants to success in peace resolution, the government must really, but very quickly, to go with European decision to speak with them how to build a body together. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, must. I don't think that he understood that Trump will not. Perhaps he will help him, but with Trump, it will be like that. He will say to Zelensky or to Putin, okay, now you stop the war, the border would be in this part and this part. If you do not agree, I will cut the budget. So he must, before this decision, he must to be with the European. And I think most of the European countries, European president or prime minister, they agree with that. To build like a body, Ukraine, Europe. But that all is in the Zelensky end.
And who are those successful mediators that have this influence on Ukraine and can explain the Ukraine that this is going to be the right approach to continue with the peaceful resolution?
How the what? Sorry, I didn't hear.
So the idea that you're presenting, it's a European perspective. Do we have any European mediators that can right now communicate that idea with the Ukrainian government, with Zelensky, that this is the approach that he should go with, and how, if they communicate it, how successful they are?
I'm not in the secret of negotiation, but I'm sure that Macron or the chief of German government spoke about that with him.
Was that successful? Did you get any, your personal perspective from Zelensky, from the Ukrainian government, that they accept that idea, that they can lean towards that direction?
No. Unfortunately, no. Because when I hear Zelensky is speaking all the time with U.S. and he thinks that U.S. with Trump will not be. For me, Trump is very dangerous.
And you've mentioned that before, that it's hard to negotiate or stop the war because both of the leaders, the Ukrainian leader and the Russian leader, they have egos and they're kind of like separating their own needs from the country needs. How do you think this all will, what's your estimation in terms of the war? If that makes the conflict very complex, because it's kind of like being around leaders and not around country's interest, or country, nobody's working for the best of the country.
Yeah, and I was all the time very surprised. I'm not surprised about Putin. Putin is a dictator, and fine and point. We don't discuss about that. But I'm all the time surprised that we never hear about the European Parliament, about a small opposition. You can be with Zelensky, with the war, for the war against Russia, but you can have some difference with the president. And we never hear this difference.
Why?
It's like when you see on the news about and when you read on Ukraine, you think there is no opposition because we never hear. I don't know if the parliament is open, it's still working. We don't know about that, about discussion. And I'm sure there are many people in Ukraine, even members of the parliament, they are for the president. They would say, okay, we have to continue, we have to fight against the Russian, but we are not agree with the president Zelensky, but one problem or two problems. And that is the problem, I think, in Ukraine. We don't feel, we know that it's a democratic country, but we don't see it. We don't see the democracy. I don't know if there is a head of opposition. We never hear him or her.
Do you think from that perspective, Ukraine kind of needs a tough love from people, from the countries, from the organization that are helping Ukraine and direct Ukraine into a more democratic perspective where we're still on your side, we want to support you. You are like the right side of the conflict, if we can say it that way. But you also need to get some tough love from the perspective. We want to see election. We want to see the head of position. We want to be able to criticize you.
Yes, perhaps it's not time in the war. It's not time for elections, presidential election, but it's time perhaps to hear the parliament and to hear some minister, because many ministers were to disagree with Zelensky. They were fired, and it's not good. And I will give you an example. I'm so surprised that nobody is speaking about the future of Ukraine inside the country, about the civil society. Nobody is speaking about officially. I'm sure that many people, many think tanks are speaking about that, but nobody in the government or in the opposition, if there is an opposition, is speaking about that. And I'm really afraid about the future. I will give you another example. We take the fact that Donbass will continue to be Ukraine province. So how the Ukrainian will speak with people from Donbass? What would be what the children will learn in school? If it would be equality between the people, and if people from Donbass it would be possible for them to live in Kiev or not. All those questions now they have to answer. That is the preparation of the after war. And the goal for me, the government has two goals: win the war, okay, or not to lose the war, because nobody wins a war,
And not the future.
and to prepare the future.
Do you think that this is not happening simply because they're focused on themselves and not on the national interest?
Yeah.
Because this is what I'm getting out of it. Because if they were focused on the national interest, they would have all those discussions. What are we doing with all the people that are going to come from the conflicting, I don't know if we can say conflicting, from the areas where there is an actual war, will be move freely in the country. The language situation is not solved. By the way, how does that look from the European perspective, this whole situation with the language, where Ukraine seems or restricted? How is European Union or Europe or European countries are reacting to that? Because this is not the democratic approach terms of, freedom of speech,
Yeah,
freedom of
I don't see
voice.
many. I didn't see many reaction about that. It was a small point for me. It's very important. That means many things, and I was surprised that nobody was speaking about that, about this point, because people Donbass or other parts they speak Russian. Okay, so that is a native language, and that is. We come back to the last question: what will be the future with those people? They will speak only Ukrainian and not Russian. For example, I think you change the date of Christmas, but most of the people are Orthodox. So 25th of December,
It's
even Orthodox in Paris. Okay, 25 of December is day off, but they go to the church for the Orthodox date. It's small point and it's irritating point, but not important.
Eric. So I want to, kind of go over technical components. How, if we were the people inside Ukraine who are trying to win not just the war, but also the future, right? Because you can win the war, but you can lose the future. What technical steps, actions we planning, strategizing, and maybe even acting on today to win that future? We've mentioned language. I personally think that language it's a skill. The more languages you speak, the more powerful you are because you can communicate with more people, and communication is everything. You can resolve problems, you negotiate deals, right? If we communicate the same language without a translator, we can understand each other's humor. We can build a better relationship. We can build a stronger bond. So having a population that speaks multiple languages, it's a benefit. What Ukrainian government or what civil society should portray from the perspective an opportunity for other parties and other in the political life of Ukraine, how, from your perspective, all that should look like. So we're not just winning the war, but we're just winning the future. And I just want to perspective here. This is my personal perspective. I might be wrong, but for example, if we take Germany in the World War II, they have lost dramatically.
Yeah.
And right, but they have lost the war, and I'm happy that they have lost the war because that was the evil side in the history. But they have won the future. They have educated their children in schools what has happened, for what reason that happened, and how we make sure that we don't repeat that mistake so we don't end up in that position.
You have to speak about the past. A little. Why we start a war and what was the impact of this war. I would give you an example. When I do negotiation between two countries, I take country A and I say, okay, what do you want? So they say, we want A, B, C, D, F. And I go to the other country, what do you want? With the same question, and they answer. And when I see the same answer between the country A and B, so we will start about that, about this point. So something that both of them agree. And it would be more easy after to speak about territory or prisoner or what you want. But to start with something that both of the country want. And that must be the same with all the civil society to find what really they want. Perhaps more, we spoke about language, we spoke about justice, about perhaps for the m- most of the people in Ukraine, in Donbass, in Crimea, where you want, they would they want to speak about education of the children. They want the same education. So you have to speak about that. What really the people want. And all the time to think if, for example, you are from Kiev, how the people from Donbass would think about that. If I say A, how they would receive receive that. So for that, the parliament is very important, but not only the parliament. In each province of Ukraine, you have to set up groups, interfaith group, intercultural, inter social group, inter-ethnic group, and they will speak and to ask the same question to all those groups to find if there is something very important for the people and to give them an answer. That is the most important, to understand that the government hears the problem and the revendication of the people. Even if the government is not agree with that, but the government must go after the people. So that is the first step, discussion, national reconciliation, and after to think how to rebuild this country after this war, after first the civil war and the war against Putin. How to rebuild this country? What what is the goal as member of this country? What is our goal? We want to go to Europe. We want to go to NATO. We want to be independent. So what we would do with that? How what would be the alliance, the new alliance with other countries? Because we don't want to be only under the American. Perhaps we want to be a little bit with India, a little bit for with Israel, with I don't know, with Europe or other countries. So many discussion, and the most important, not to to put the war criminal in the jail, but the other people to speak with them, and they will explain why they work for example, they work a little bit for the Russian administration, and don't put shame on them.
Eric, I want to, criticize a little bit Ukraine, but not to diminish them. But from the perspective, we have to point out what they're not doing correct at the moment and figure out a way how can we potentially direct them in this direction. And I think partners, Ukrainian partners that are financially supporting Ukraine, militarily supporting Ukraine, they're kind of have to have their own part in that because they're just dropping on them money, financial aid, military aid, but they're not pushing them, in my perspective, enough towards everything that we've discussed and everything that you've presented right now. So, in terms of the education, from what I know, schools in different languages are closing. Like schools that were taught in Hungarian on the western part of Ukraine, they're closing. Schools that were taught in Polish language, they're closing. Schools, obviously, that were taught in a Russian language, closing in massive proportions. So I think the educational component, they're not performing as they should have to win the future. In terms of the language, the same situation happens. Ukrainians, at least half of them, spoke Russian as a mother language. Now they're being, I don't want to say suppressed because I don't think there's anything suppressive, but from the government perspective, but on a local perspective, on a day-to-day life, I do feel that people are facing challenges if they're trying to get services, not from the governmental bodies, but just going to supermarkets and receiving others where they can receive resilience if they will communicate in Russian. I do understand that Ukrainians can argue and say, well, but Russians are attacking us. So this is an aggressor language. I get it, but at the same time, this is somebody else's mother language that he grew up in this country. He hasn't done anything wrong to you. And he's just simply communicating what he potentially can communicate, or maybe that's the only language that he can communicate. So in my perspective,
and he will continue to drink in Russian.
Yeah. Right. So I think they're losing the educational component. They're losing the language component. They're closing different churches that are not Ukraine-oriented churches. So I think they're also losing the religious component or the religious part. And we can continue to break it down that way. We'll find many more subjects where Ukraine is losing its future because of its own actions, not because of the fighting part that is trying to destroy Ukraine militarily. What we can do, what technical steps, if there are any examples where we can help Ukrainian government, Ukrainian civil society to start working that direction in terms of language, religion, education, to direct them in this perspective where they need to understand that they're not just fighting now for their life and to win the war, but they're also fighting for the future, which is not less important.
So the example can be in Africa, Rwanda in Africa. So it was a terrible war. They spoke about national reconciliation. They have many languages, like each country in Africa, and it's a success. So you can learn about that. You can learn a little bit about South Africa too. Look, in the South Africa Constitution, there is more than 20 official languages. So I understand now in time of war, it's very difficult to say, okay, let the people speak Russian. I'll give you an example. If during the Second World War, people spoke, if it was very difficult for people to speak German, I can understand. But now we spoke about the after-war, the post-war. So for the post-war, people must think that people that even if they are pro Ukraine and against Putin, they speak Russian. What can they do? They learn because they learn at school Russian. So I think Ukrainian, the language of Ukrainian must be Ukrainian, but you can have some typical language in this country. So people will learn in, I don't know, in language A, B, C, or D, because most of the people that are speaking this language, but the national language would be Ukrainian.
And it doesn't have to conflict each other.
No. I think more, if a country with many cultures is more intelligent and is more open. As I said, people will continue to dream in the native language. So, and people would feel not free if it's forbidden for them to speak a language. A language is a part of your soul. So, okay, the national language, the official language can be Ukrainian or what you want, but let the people speak how they want to speak. And if you are speaking Russian, that not means that you are for Putin. Perhaps you fight against Putin, but your native language is Russian.
I think this is one of the biggest mistakes where that's allowed, that kind of approach allowed Putin to monopolize the Russian language and kind of like make it his language, where there should have been a separation between Russian and Putin himself, like the Russian language and Putin himself, because that approach kind of like allows him to monopolize the language and use it as a weapon against people. Eric, if nothing is changing from the inside of Ukraine, how do you think the world for Ukraine and for the European Union will look like after the war?
I'm so sorry to say, but if nothing is changing inside, you will see another time like a civil war in Ukraine. Because
you mean at the end of the full-scale war with Russia, there will be potential civil war inside Ukraine?
Yeah, because people didn't change. The problem that you had before the war, you would have the same problem after the war. So the problem with the Donbass, with the population of Donbass, so you would have the same problem. So you have to discuss about that.
Is there anything that we can do to point them out into the right direction?
Yeah, to start negotiation, to start speaking, to not to send order from Kiev to Donbass, perhaps to think about not independence. Sure, that would be a part of Ukraine, but like a small autonomy about language, about the history, about many things. They have to, most of the countries now, not France, but most of the countries are like in Germany, some landes. So perhaps the model can be German, like a landes. From the eastern landes and the west landes are not the same, and even for the economy, that's not the same. But and they work together.
And they live in one country.
Yeah, they have the same defense.
Thank you so much, Eric Gozlan, a specialist in geopolitics and civil diplomacy, was with us today to discuss those topics. Eric, thank you so much again.
Thank you, too.